Well, so now we're going to begin the next session. The title of this session is The Best Practice of International Cooperation for Managing the Climate Crisis and Strengthening Climate Resilience. Today we have speakers from academia and social societies and also the NGOs and so on. And for those who have questions during the presentations, please use your questions on the chat box. And after the session, we're going to have a Q&A session. And also, please understand that due to time constraints, your question may not be addressed. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to the Netherlands. We're going to invite Director Maarten van Aalst of IFRC Climate Center. And from the IFRC, he's very renowned and famous. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here, and what a pleasure to be attending this wonderful forum already this morning. What a set of speeches by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, of course, but also by the eminent panelists before me. What I hope to do, and I'll share my screen for a presentation, is to give you an overview of what's already happening in the movement on climate change. And what was maybe thought of as a long-term and environmental issue just 20 years ago is now front and center in our humanitarian work. What you see here is a poster that the French Red Cross made for the previous big climate summit. You know, we're all preparing now for the big climate meeting in Glasgow early next month. But in 2015, we had that famous Paris meeting where the Paris Agreement was reached. And although the Red Cross at that point was really gearing up on climate change, it was still this question of why are we so engaged? And this poster was made by French Red Cross to illustrate it. What you see here is floodwaters in a street in Paris, and people thought of this as an artist's impression of a potential long-term future, something we needed to avoid. And indeed, the poster says something like, "We'll always be there to save you if needed." And you can see the life raft on that Parisian balcony. But we would much rather prevent that from being necessary. And of course, that refers to all those elements Ban Ki-moon already mentioned and other speakers before me. We need to reduce emissions to avoid the climate crisis from getting further out of hand. Then we need to do good disaster risk reduction to prevent floodwaters from entering our cities. But then maybe at some point, we'll need to be ready to respond. Now, this was, as I said, an artist's impression of what a long-term future might look like if we would have failed to reduce greenhouse gases and to adapt effectively. Well, here is what Paris looked like. Sorry, let me see if I can advance my slide. Here is what Paris looked like just half a year later. This is June 2016. And you can see there were life rafts in the streets of Paris. And what you see there on the bottom is the artwork of the Louvre Museum, which had to be evacuated for the rising floodwaters. So if anything, there is no longer a choice whether the Red Cross Red Crescent movement confronts the climate crisis. In terms of response to events already happening, we have no choice. So we may have been thinking we were nearing a precipice and we could decide whether or not to talk or to act. But I think we're already flowing down with the water and we're facing the consequences. And we've seen that really badly in the last couple of years as well. I am director of the International Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. So we support many of you in the room today. We work very closely with the colleagues in the IFRC Secretariat, like Tiziana Bonzon that you heard from in the previous panel, but also with many national societies around the world already confronting these impacts. But then we also work with the science community to try and give us the best advice to inform our humanitarian operations. And here are 3 examples from just the last 2 years where we worked with scientists to understand how the disasters that were already affecting us were already aggravated by climate change. And what you see there in the middle is the Australian bushfires, at least 30% more likely due to climate change. On the left, that terrible heat wave in Canada, at least 150 times more likely due to climate change. And in fact, without climate change, that heat probably would not have happened in Canada, just impossible without climate change. And on the right, in Germany, actually here just on my doorstep in the Netherlands, the deadly flooding killed over 200 people, up to 9 times more likely due to climate change. So the first message is climate change is already our reality, even in terms of disaster response. So we have no choice but to confront the climate crisis. Now, of course, these are rich countries. And of course, even in rich countries, the Red Cross has a role to play in these disasters. In Germany, in fact, the German Red Cross is assisting with water and sanitation after the terrible flooding, applying solutions that they were previously providing in their international aid department to countries hit by flooding abroad. It's now used domestically. So everyone is in this, we're in it together, everyone is being hurt. But of course, the poorest countries are getting hit hardest. So to just give you one more example of where we're already confronted with these impacts, this is in your own region, Super Typhoon Amphan last year in Bangladesh. A very successful evacuation of millions of people actually prevented what would otherwise have been a massive loss of lives. As you know, in Bangladesh, for instance, in the 1970s, we sometimes lost hundreds of thousands of lives in a single storm. This time, just over 100 people died, of course, still very sad. And you see, we even adjusted the evacuations in light of the COVID pandemic that was happening at the same time, and distributed people over a larger number of shelters, for instance, to prevent the infection from spreading. At the same time, those people whose lives we've saved are coming back to devastated livelihoods, like you see there on the left top. So this is partly the challenge we face now. We may be succeeding to some extent saving more lives, but we are struggling to save livelihoods, especially of those poorest people most affected. So part of the answer needs to be doing better, anticipating more of these extremes, the unprecedented extremes that I just showed you. But we also need to increase resilience of livelihoods in the face of that ever increasing and more volatile climate. Now, this hasn't stopped with COVID. And there were many references already in previous panels about the need to have a greener, more resilient recovery. At the moment, frankly, the problem with COVID is that our work has just gotten harder. We now have to evacuate people while also having all these additional measures in place to prevent against COVID. And in addition, 100 million people have been thrown back into extreme poverty and are now more vulnerable to the climate crisis. So again, our work also dealing with the pandemic is now intersecting with how we deal with the climate crisis. So once again, the climate crisis is there already. And the real question is now, what do we do? And to some extent, we're already doing a lot, just responding to all of these crises, but also what do we do differently? And the first answer needs to be that we can actually still avoid disasters, even if we are in a crisis already. Improving our preparedness for response to changing risks. And a lot of that is what we already know how to do in terms of disaster preparedness. We just need to be aware of the fact that the extremes, the hazards in the climate system may be getting worse. But what you then do in terms of planning for a good evacuation is exactly the same. Our national societies know how to do this. Secondly, investing at scale in local solutions. So the climate change adaptation that Ban Ki-moon was also referring to is often planned from the global level top down, then at national governments, thinking about big infrastructure, for instance, which is also necessary. But we also need to empower local communities to take the actions that can only be taken locally, based on an understanding of risk and about the most vulnerable people that is only available locally. Adopting climate smart programming. So for instance, if we work on food security, we now need to think about what the current climate is in those places and how we can make people less vulnerable to a more volatile climate. Climate resilient infrastructure, as I mentioned, but also the alternatives, nature-based solutions, where, for instance, we restore deforested hillsides to decrease the risk of flooding, or restore mangroves in places where coastal protection is needed. Tiziana already gave a wonderful introduction, so I don't need to mention this again, but just another call out to the Climate Charter, where our Red Cross at Crescent movement has also led the humanitarian world, doing our part, reducing our own environmental footprint, but also confronting the rising risks and assisting others to become more resilient in the face of these rising crises. We've also already expressed what's needed to do that within our own movement in these ambitions to address the climate crisis, which were adopted in 2020, just after the last international conference. And basically what that shows is that it cuts across all of our work: disaster risk reduction, early action, preparedness, reducing health impacts, addressing climate displacements, looking at climate smart livelihoods, and then doing that through mobilizing actions, working with governments, also influencing investments, laws, policies, plans, practices, strengthening our own volunteer base, and then innovating and developing the tools and approaches that enable all of this to work effectively. And we've needed that more than ever, of course, also during the COVID pandemic, when all of this had to happen largely virtually. I already mentioned I'm director of a global virtual team supporting many of you and working very closely together also to distill the learning from the work in so many national societies and make it available to others. And we were originally started by the Netherlands Red Cross, but are now a very global team with people based around the world, including in several secretariat offices, and people from 26 nationalities. So there are Climate Center colleagues nearby all of you. And our aim is to strengthen the work to learn how to do this in our own movement, but also connect to outside partners. Because one message also for the movement is we cannot do this alone. We need these partnerships with governments at all levels, from the local to the global scale, but also with science and with business. Let me give you a few examples of where this sort of building on our existing Red Cross, Red Crescent capacities, but thinking about where we can slightly do better to face the rising risks that we're confronting in this climate crisis, where that is already happening. And the first example I would say is anticipatory action. So, you know, we already had early warning systems for a long time, but in many cases we failed to take the additional action that cost money that we needed to mobilize from international humanitarian donors. So in fact, we would be evacuating people, saving lives, but other measures that we could take before the disaster to reduce the impacts could not be taken, and the money would only come after the disaster. And that was simply because the donors' rules didn't allow us to spend it earlier, and we didn't have the procedures to tell us what to do. Now, mechanisms like forecast-based financing have actually shifted this whole practice. So the international donors are now willing to trust us to use part of the money that they are giving us before a disaster. And for instance, in this case, we're distributing cash so that people can actually take actions themselves. For instance, to save some of the animals that they own rather than losing them during a storm, so that they can pick up their livelihood again after the storm has passed. This anticipatory action was not possible 10 years ago with this financing that is now also facilitated by our own Disaster Response Emergency Fund. And the fact that that's now possible is enabling over 30 countries already to do this, and also has changed how the humanitarian community at large is doing this. So we, the Red Cross Red Crescent, have been leaders on this, starting 10 years ago, doing the hard groundwork, but then building not only that work in our own movement, but also inspiring the rest of the humanitarian community. And this took efforts on the ground with local communities, but also actually at the UN to get these discussions going. And it's now actually, so as you see in this cartoon, it was very difficult to get the funding for disasters that had not yet happened, but that is now possible and is happening in over 30 countries with many other partners. What I wanted to highlight is that this is now one of the big commitments that is being taken by us and by many of these partners that I mentioned to the Glasgow Climate Change Summit. The Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, which is now hosted by the IFRC Secretariat, is enabling this working together also with governments and with financiers also from the climate side, like the Green Climate Fund. Another example, and these are just a few examples from many where we have such work going on, but the importance of communication. So one of the challenges that we faced as a Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, for instance, supporting these discussions on anticipation, or supporting discussions on how to do work on health and care in a changing climate, or how to address climate-related displacement, was that people found the information about climate change abstract and scientific. And I could come with another presentation with all that powerful evidence from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but still not connect with the local volunteers on the ground that actually have to make decisions day to day. So we've invested a lot working together with national societies, developing, for instance, serious games that allow us to communicate and talk about the solutions that are needed. And indeed, some of those solutions were then taken also to policy circles, like you see here with my colleague Pablo Suarez in the White House. So this is enabling us also to raise our voices about the policy solutions that are needed. Here's another example of communication. This is in the case of India Red Cross, who organized flash mobs to raise awareness about heat risk, another one of those rising risks that are changing so rapidly. And again, we can do a lot on our own, but we do better if we're raising awareness of the wider population and indeed work together, for instance, with city authorities. The final really important piece is to think about the work and on that interface between climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. And I know this is also an area of focus for the Korean Center, working together with governments, for instance, also on disaster legislation, but also thinking about how we can connect what is happening now in terms of climate legislation to disaster legislation. And we're seeing that there's a lot of work to be done there. We saw last year in our World Disasters Report that of the 104 analyzed national disaster risk management laws, only 16% already integrate elements related to climate change adaptation. You could also say the reverse. Too many climate laws still don't integrate the disaster risk dimension. Well, obviously, another area, just to name one more, displacement in a changing climate. We know people that are already displaced are at increased risk to extreme weather events, and Cox's Bazar is one example of where you see those things coming together. We also know climate change may be causing displacement. For instance, if flooding is forcing people to leave. And our national societies already play a big role dealing with that displacement. Now, how do we gear up for more that may be needed? And how do we empower communities to raise their voices to find the right solutions? And finally, what was already mentioned in light of the climate charter, we can do more to reduce our own footprint. So there's a lot available now in terms of greening humanitarian response, where we can not only be more efficient, fly less, think about our fleet, think about the mess we leave behind sometimes, be more effective, but also respect the environment better. That then also allows us to raise our voice more about the need to reduce emissions in the global community to avoid the risks from getting further out of hand. Because what's happening right now, and I think this may be the most important message, we're seeing all of these challenges coming at once: pandemics, climate risks, conflicts, economic downturns, and livelihoods being devastated. And as this cartoon shows, the disasters are generally collaborating better than we are. There's a whole discussion happening in a climate world, and there's a discussion happening in a disaster world, and there's a discussion happening in a health world, while all of these challenges are interrelated. And our presence in local communities where none of these challenges happen in isolation, but people are faced with all of these things at once, that presence allows us to speak about the integrated solutions for resilience that are needed. Climate Changed Me is the place where many of those stories are currently being shared. And you see the power of people like Greta Thunberg, but also volunteers from all over the world sharing their stories. And again, this power, the power of our movement also speaking up, sharing the local solutions that we're already implementing in practice with the wider world, is another key contribution that we can make. I'd like to leave it there. Thank you again, and I look forward to the rest of your great forum and also the rest of the Planet Red Summit the coming 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Maarten, for your wonderful presentation. 네, 이제 지금 적십자 운동의 그
Now he highlighted what kind of activities the Red Cross and Red Crescent have made in the climate crisis and climate adaptation. If you have some question, we'd like to open the floor for the Q&A session, which will be followed by the end of the presentation. So please feel free to leave some questions. And now I'd like to go to India. Now we have the lead technical specialist, Rohini, who is working for the UNDP. So he is joining us online.
Yes, Rohini, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. A very big thank you to the organizers for this very, very important forum on an extremely important topic. So I work in the climate change adaptation team, which is part of the Nature, Climate, Energy cluster at UNDP. I'm currently in India, but I'm normally based in Bangkok. I would request the organizers to move the slide for me so that I can cover. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a bit about disaster risk reduction and resilience in the Asia-Pacific region. With a few examples of the work which UNDP is doing to support countries. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, it's no surprise to anyone in this audience, I believe, that we are governed by these global frameworks. All countries have signed on to them. So the first is the Sendai framework, which is something that the DRR community, the humanitarian community is very well aware of, including some of those priorities, which include understanding risk, also investing in the responses, And so that is something which most countries have signed on to, and a lot of national disaster management authorities are translating these global priorities into national action. Next slide, please. And I think the important, some of the challenges which are faced by countries, a lot of discussion is around how
Recording in progress.
If colleagues can see the slides at the moment. May I just check if someone can project the slides, please? Hello? Hi, colleagues.
Hello, do you hear me?
May I check if the slides are available on the screen? Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Okay,
yes, we have.
thank you very much. Okay, so the first one was on Sendai. I didn't want to go into details about that. Now, the second important framework is the framework around the Paris Agreement. And I don't want to talk about the entire Paris Agreement. I mean, the most important, a very important part of the Paris Agreement is about making the commitments for emissions reduction to keep, global warming well below 2 degrees and closer to 1.5 degrees. And I think you will have read a lot in the news about, where we are with that. But I want to focus a bit about adaptation in it. And I think just to remind us all that Article 7 of the Paris Agreement is about enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability. And that there is a global goal on adaptation, but it's not a quantified goal. And the importance the Paris Agreement places on adaptation planning, which is looking not just at urgent and immediate needs, but at long-term needs. And the national adaptation plans are a vehicle for this. There's also a mention of loss and damage, recognizing the importance of minimizing and addressing loss and damage. This issue is under negotiation as to how this will be addressed, but this is also a very important part of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. And I think the last thing I'll say globally is that I think the AR5 risk framework is kind of very important here because it introduces the concept of risk along with the issue of vulnerability, exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. And in my mind, this also provides a link to make much more linkages between the disaster risk reduction responses and the climate change adaptation responses. And I think we heard in Maarten's presentation, it's important to have this integrated approach, that the disasters are collaborating more than perhaps these frameworks are talking to each other. And maybe at the community level, there's much more integration, but at the national level, there is not so much integration at the moment. A lot of the climate change adaptation planning is done through environment ministries, planning ministries, and finance ministries, whereas the disaster risk reduction planning is done by the national disaster management authorities. Some countries have an integrated framework, particularly for example, the Pacific Islands, but it is not the case across the world. Next slide, please. Here I want to just again remind that as our previous presenter mentioned, in order to bring these two things together, there is a global risk informed early action partnership, which IFRC is the secretariat, and it has amongst its objectives, one of them is to have this more integrated approach at the planning framework level. The second one is to increase infrastructure investment in early warning systems and capacities, and to really reach a lot of people on the ground. So this integrated approach, I think, is something which the REAP partnership is really focusing on. And it was launched in 2019, but there is much more integrated work happening due to this partnership, but much more is needed. Next slide, please. So just turning a little bit to Asia Pacific, I work at a global level, but I wanted to go, I think the interest of the region is very paramount in this meeting. And I think it's very clear that the Asia Pacific region is very sensitive, according to the new IPCC report, to much more extreme, sort of heat waves. Also, increased precipitation. It's the most disaster prone region, and there's a huge population in the low-lying areas and the coastal areas. And therefore, from the perspective of the climate change response, adaptation is as important as mitigation, if not more so. Next slide, please. There's something I missed on the earlier slide, which is that there was UNDP conducted a public perceptions poll about how many citizens in the region think that climate is an emergency. And I think that amongst the people polled, more than 2/3 thought that there is a climate emergency, which requires urgent responses in many thematic sectors. So it's not, there was a time 10 years ago where perception surveys did not show the awareness of people on the ground, but clearly that awareness has shifted. The nationally determined contributions, because this is the primary mechanism of the Paris Agreement. And as we, and they are, the NDCs are really a lot about the targets for mitigation and emission reductions. Sorry, okay, I've got back my slides, so sorry about moving along. Let me just, perhaps I could ask the presenter to take us to the next slide. Okay. So basically, talking about these NDCs and what is the status of the NDCs in Asia Pacific, and to what extent are they looking at issues of adaptation and resilience in it? So I think to begin with, the NDCs were meant to be about emission reductions and mitigation commitments. But as the submissions have taken place, UNDP has a large program called the Climate Promise, which is supporting the enhancement of these NDCs. We know, and you can see on the slide here, all the countries that are colored in green, which is basically are countries that have submitted their NDCs to date. So as of the end of September, there's quite a big response, and these have been submitted. Quite a few of these include adaptation and resilience in their nationally determined contributions. In some cases, it includes targets. In other cases, it includes quantification of losses and damages. So clearly, the governments in the region have really started to put a value on some of the risks and vulnerabilities, but also the steps they want to take. And they are very high level, these documents. So it shows huge ownership, from the government at the highest level. There is also a group of countries that have made much more extensive coverage of adaptation and resilience in their NDCs. And I would encourage everyone, when they have a moment, to actually study these NDCs to see, what exactly are they saying about adaptation and resilience. And there is a huge, I would say, enhancement of ambition in terms of the enhanced adaptation component. So these are the things that are not talked about as much, because the NDCs are looked at more in terms of their ambitions related to mitigation. But I encourage everyone to really look at them from the point of view of adaptation and resilience. Next slide, please. So in terms of some of the work we are doing on climate adaptation, it's really across many different sectors. It includes ecosystem-based adaptation. It includes food security in agriculture, water and coastal resilience. You can see, and there's a strong component on mainstreaming, which is the institutional work required to work with ministries of environment and finance on long-term risk management approaches. And that's where the integration has to happen with the disaster management authorities. It is not at the scale yet needed, but there's certainly a lot of encouraging steps in that direction. And we are not going to go into all the programs of UNDP on this, but I just want to focus on one or two critical programs where the national level response to climate change adaptation is being captured. And these are the entry points also for the dialogue around disaster risk reduction, by the colleagues that are working on those topics. So, for example, the GCF readiness, there is a window, a window which provides funding for countries to do adaptation planning, and it's called GCF Readiness for National Adaptation Planning. And UNDP is working with more than 30 countries on this, and most of the work is normally in 4 or 5 different areas. One is on upgrading risk and vulnerability assessments, not at a project level, but at a broader level, maybe in a geographic area or a thematic topic. And the other one is on costing adaptation options. What are the prioritization of adaptation that has to happen, and what is the integration that is required with other sectors and other thematic areas. So this GCF readiness window is something which lots of countries, around 9 or 10 countries in this region, are working on this through UNDP, but through a host of other agencies such as GIZ and FAO and UNEP. There's a much bigger group. So there's a big opportunity for dialogue with agencies that work on disaster risk reduction and the humanitarian work. The other key program I want to highlight is a joint partnership FAO and UNDP have to work with the agriculture sector on unpacking the priorities in the NDCs, and to see what are the risk and vulnerability assessments needed to really make sure that there are more integrated solutions that can be designed for the agricultural sector, and how to integrate this in the governance frameworks, and how to involve the private sector. So that's another flagship program that we are working on. Next slide, please. I think, yeah, I've already gone through the details in this slide. Next slide, please. So some of the highlights of the new NDCs in relation to adaptation. So the Bangladesh NDC, for example, has a stronger adaptation component, and this time they're connecting it to their national adaptation plans. The same is with Bhutan. They have mentioned 3 or 4 extremely vulnerable sectors, and they are preparing an operational adaptation plan to really go with this. And this is, this will include identification of scaled up adaptation options in areas such as forestry, biodiversity, agriculture. So these are areas which are actually areas where there would be a strong disaster risk reduction component as well. But that sort of response has to be really integrated at the national level. Then Papua New Guinea now has adaptation targets and adaptation indicators in their NDC, which is again very unique to any adaptation plan or NDC. So this is another one where there is, I think, a strong integrated component possible. At the moment, it talks much more about adaptation, but there's a huge DRR link to this. And also Vietnam, for example, is working on preparing adaptation plans for each sector and each region. So there is, and these are all mentioned in the nationally determined contributions. And to emphasize many of them, for example, Sri Lanka, they've quantified the losses and damages in their adaptation part of their NDC, and several other countries are doing so as well. So clearly there's a huge, political sort of momentum from developing countries to do more integrated work in the region together. I'm just going to say one more thing before I close. I missed a slide when we were speaking, and that was about the importance of the data architecture, because a lot of integration work needs to happen in the way data is being captured. There's a whole ecosystem of data required. There are lots of DRR databases in each country that are being developed. These are not, they do not include climate projections in many cases, which are being done separately by ministries of environment. And there's a very, very big opportunity to integrate these. UNDP is working with many countries on these databases. And I think it would be a really great opportunity to work with all the agencies that are also working on risk reduction and humanitarian work to integrate this historical data with also future projections of, in terms of climate impacts in different sectors. So I think maybe I'll stop there and hand back to the organizers.
Okay, thank you, Rohini, for your wonderful presentation. 네, 감사합니다. 로히니
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. It has been covered by Ms. Rohini Kohli. Now, continuing on, I'd like to invite Ms. Jisun, Save the Children Korea, and she will share our actual cases for the developing countries. Hello everyone, I am Jisun from the Save the Children Korea. First of all, I am honored to be invited over this meaningful occasion to share the project that I am working on. I'd like to thank the organizer of this event for giving me this chance. 2021, we try to have the project to have climate adaptation project children-oriented. And we focus on the diversified fund for climate change and climate response. What I'd like to today talk about is the Vietnamese cases, which is about the strengthening capacity on climate change and disaster risk reduction. It has been started from 2015, and the first 3 years for the development and the next 5 years will be about the actual implementation. Before moving on to the actual case, I'd like to cover the introduction first, and I will share 4 cases. And to wrap it up, I will just introduce you the future project that we are planning today. This is an Inform Risk Index. Vietnam faces the highest disaster risk level, ranked at 91 out of 191 countries. Together with Bangladesh, Vietnam is the most vulnerable to flooding and cyclone. On top of that, they see the devastating damages from the drought and flooding, and they are taking the 13th out of 50, and they are having a direct impact from the global warming and climate crisis. Out of many regions, our project is ongoing around the Mekong Basin. And Mekong is one of the most representative agricultural area. It is fragile to high wave and flooding and drought, so the land resources, environment, and the livelihood of the local community have under devastating impact. And the Gamao province is also suffer from natural disasters such as flooding and drought, so their livelihood has been hugely devastated. And if you focus on the livelihood income, the flooding has the biggest impact on their livelihood and income, and climate crisis have a multilateral and complex influence on the local community. For the last 6 years, Save the Children have carried out projects at 5 different stages. From 2015 and 2017, it has been implemented as a humanitarian project together with KOICA, and from 2018, we set out a mid and long-term project to reduce the disaster risk, and from 2019, our project shifted its focus on the climate disaster and risk reduction. Let me just jump into the detail of the project. I'm afraid you may not read the letters on the screen, but I will just give you the verbal explanation. We have 5 projects. At the very beginning of the project in the 2015, we focus on community-based DRR, and from 2016 to 2022, we focus on DRR at schools and waste management. So our support has been expanded. And from 2020 and 2022, we also have a project to enhance resilience by kind of securing the livelihood for the local community. And because from the overall perspective of the project, we didn't have exit, and we also cannot measure the effect of the project. So from the 2018, we plan out the midterm project. And natural disaster is increasing its damages because of the global warming, but there was no the research about the current status of their the climate change's influence on their social and economic factor. So we conducted some survey to see if the project related in the climate crisis has an actual impact on children and local community. But we have to have some ways to support the local community more directly, and we also come up with some plans to secure their livelihood. So from 2022, we had a feasibility assessment to see how the climate change have an impact on the local community and who are the most vulnerable from the climate change. Before moving on to the actual case, I'd like to give you the background of project area and project itself. When we start the project from 2020, we actually had the feasibility study. The streams were dried out because of the drought, and it's the environment around the schools and the local community. The project we currently working on is 2-year project from 2020 to next year. And as I mentioned earlier, it is focusing on strengthened resilience, and it has 3 specific targets. And let me just share 4 cases related to DRR. The first up is flood-safe latrine. It has a lot of rivers and some ponds. They have a very traditional toilet where the waste is directly coming into the rivers. According to one report, 22% of respondents said that they are using fish pond traditional latrine, and 5% are just doing it, toileting in the streets. When we are having the flooding, that will pollute the neighboring areas, and it also pollutes some water resources. So the flood-prone area should have better toilet to secure the water quality. Many local people are highly interested in safer toilet, but not many people are having the better toilets because they understand it costs a lot of money and it's difficult to install. And most of the people in the region believe that the waste can be feed fishes, so they do not recognize how important the personal hygiene and the toilet is. So according to our project, we support the toilet and the personal hygiene, and we also train them how to use and maintain this toilet in a hygiene way. And by doing so, we can give them ownership to control and manage of this the facility in the future. And we also educate how they can maintain these facilities. As this case showed that actually the recipient is not only receiving the modernized toilet, but he is kind of actors to promote the importance of the toilet in the local area. So he encouraged other neighbors to install this better the toilet. So by doing so, we are making sustainable approach for this project. And this is a second case of WASH, which is for the rainwater harvesting system. As the table shows, when they are using the water at home, there is a big differences between the dry season and rainy season. And the water is very short during the dry season. So 19% of households suffer from water shortages, but that the percentage goes to 47 to 51% if it goes to poor neighborhood. On top of that, before using the water, not many people are having pre-processing before using the water. And 51% of them said that they feel burdened to pay for the pre-processing, and 33% do not pre-process the water because they do not understand why that is important. So when providing water, the potable waters and irrigation, we have to raise awareness how important it is to control the water quality for themselves and the neighborhood. Based on that, the community leaders and the local government and partner organization work together to provide the rainwater harvesting system for the poorer people. As the recipient said that, they suffer from the water shortages all year round, and 40% of their income spent to buy the water. But now they can guarantee the full supply of water, so they can save a lot of household incomes. Because these areas do not have any sewage and water supply system, so the drought and the natural disaster has become worsened, and their situation of water supply will be worsened as well. So the water supply for the household is directly related to the quality of their lives. So until they get these subsidies from the government, we try to provide sustainable water resources for them. Together with the flood-safe latrine, we also educate how they can control and maintain rainwater harvesting system, and we expect more people will install rainwater harvesting system at their home. The next case is for school. And the project site has a lot of schools, but that's located very close to rivers or water body. They have to trip to schools through unsafe way, and teachers do not have knowledge about how to respond or prevent disaster. So the schools are not safe place for children. And they have never had any evacuation drill. So from 2016, we carried out the DRL activities in school. So we teach them how to swim, and at the same time, we also train teachers how they can mitigate the risk and how to evacuate safely when they face disasters. By doing so, all schools we support, they set out some risk resilience plan, and they also have some the drills to learn how they should act when they face with the actual disasters. 80% or more students said that they can understand DRL activities thanks to this project, and they understand as well how to keep personal hygiene. And based on this achievement, our effort has been recognized. So the local government support the schools to update the swimming facilities and some school safety facilities. Just like in this case, students can have a class to learn how to swim, and so when they just cross the river, they can swim better and they can control themselves in a safer way. And the last case started from 2020. It's about the livelihood support. And the local neighbors need to enhance their resilience. So we support livelihood support for the most vulnerable. And 43% of neighbors are engaging in the daily labor. Because of worsening natural disasters, they are very vulnerable their income is very vulnerable, and the vulnerability becomes worse after the COVID-19. So the Save the Children selected the beneficiaries, and based on their opinions, we set out some the support schemes. This is poultry, and these are the livestock that the beneficiaries select. We not only support them to buy the poultry, but also educate them how to raise them better, and each group can exchange their opinions about their experiences. And they are doing pretty good husbandry, so almost all of their livelihood are marketable. And because many want to raise the goat, so we did market research for the goat, and we also give some scientific support for them to raise the goat better. Likewise, the project that we are working at the Save the Children is expanding its foundation to disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, and we will further expanding our the foundation to our project. And let me just wrap it up with the future plan of Save the Children. Save the Children Korea will focus on climate change adaptation based on our scientific and ecological analysis. We will start our project in Vietnam and Indonesia from 2022, and we try to diversify the fund. We are the first development NGO to get the GCF certificate, and Save the Children Korea is an account member of Save the Children International. So as I mentioned, we are planning the Indonesian project. We sincerely participate in the GCF project in the future, and based on our strengths, we will cooperate with international organizations and international funds to make most of them. And with the ESG movement, we will look for close cooperation with the donors and corporations who are interested in this area. From 2022 and to 2024, we have a big umbrella structure of children-oriented climate response and adaptation. The achievements we earned from the Vietnam, we can expand our work further. Thank you for listening. If you have any question, please contact me free. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 이번
Thank
시간은
you.
우리나라 기업이 자랑스러운 과학기술을
This
가지고
is one
방글라데시에서
of the
진행하고
proud
있는 사업을
science technology
소개해드리고자
that
합니다. 글로리앤텍의
Korea has, and with
박순호
this science
대표님이십니다.
in Bangladesh, there's a businessman who are running the project.
예,
From Glorian Tech, CEO Park Sun-ho, please over to you. Hi everyone, I am Park Sun-ho of Glorian Tech, and today I'm going to talk about some of the drinking water supply project in Bangladesh. First of all, it was a project as part of a Kolka project, and also now it is funded by the companies as well. So first, this is our company's goal. It's a dream like a goal, that is to provide a supply clean water to 1 billion people. These 1 billion people have no access to clean water, and this is an astronomical number. In order to allow them to have a clean water, astronomical investment or fund is needed. Over the 20 years, we have worked on this clean water, drinking water project. There are many challenges. Of course, we need financial resources to build the project and carry out the project. But if you build a system for these clean water supply, then you have even a difficult and tricky challenge, that is to repair and maintain this system. You have to replace the filter, and you need electricity cost, and also you need a cost for the human resources are managing these systems. And during all the operation of this system over the next decades, you need investment continuously. And how to address these challenges will be very important for us. Under such a circumstances, how the climate change and the mitigation of the GHG emissions will be associated, will be discussed. Let's take a look at.
Rising sea levels and frequent floods. In southern Bangladesh, many people have difficulty using groundwater as drinking water because the sea level rise makes sea water to penetrate groundwater and contaminate arsenic. Glorian Tech provides free drinking water to about 50,000 residents of Bangladesh. How can a small Korean company make it, even if it costs a lot to supply and maintain drinking water facilities?
We developed our one sustainability through CDM. Greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced by local residents who consume drinking water using water facilities, and we turn it into carbon credit.
গ্রামের মাঝখানে একটা জলের মেশিন বসানো হয়েছে আর্সেনিক ছাড়া পরিষ্কার জল আমরা পাচ্ছি, সেখানে আমাদের বেশি দূর যাইতে হয় না জল আনতে।
Due to the drinking water facilities in the village, I got a new job despite the COVID-19 situation. It is about saving my family and saving our Bangladesh.
We invested in this project as we learned that greenhouse gas emission would be reduced by the CDM if we supply drinking water to Bangladeshi residents. We are happy to reduce greenhouse gases and supply clean water to them at the same time.
We will supply 500,000 people with drinking water and create 200 jobs in Bangladesh in 5 years.
아주 간단한 짧은 영상을 좀 만들어봤습니다.
Well, that was a very short video clip that I have prepared. Well, going forward, next decades or 15 years, to supply the drinking water to the population, we need to address the challenge of sustainability. And this is a good opportunity given to us, and also many opportunity, there is a model called the CDM. The technology of the and the finance resource of the advanced countries can be supported to the developing countries, and also, as you have heard from Mr. Ban Ki-moon and other speakers, the mitigation of emission will be brought to the advanced countries, and then we can use that as a credit. So through this, in the drinking water, we can secure the sustainability. We collaborate the local communities. Excuse me. We installed a facility for the drinking water supply, and we continue to provide the drinking water to local people. Then we can reduce the GHG emissions. And then the Korean companies and other institutions who need the GHG emission reductions, then we get the investments from them. As you know, there are many global level companies such as Samsung, Hyundai, and S-Oil. And particularly, there is generator plants as well. To just name a few, they are large emitters, and also they're very rich. So such organizations or entities can address the drinking water issue of the Bangladesh, but it's still very difficult for them to make investment because there's a few ROI. So when, however, there is a GHG emission reduction scheme is integrated or reflected, then the game will change because these companies or large entities must reduce their GHG emissions. So there will be a motivation for them to invest in this kind of drinking water system or a project. So we have allowed this or enabled these entities to invest, and of course the UN approval and also UNFCCC approvals are needed, and we made it as well. And not only the companies that participate in the projects, but ourselves, we can trade the CER at Korea Exchange. So with this, over the past 10 years, and also going forward, the next 10 years, we're going to provide the drinking water to these local people. Of course, I traveled many countries, but I never seen such a country with a serious issue of the drinking water than Bangladesh, because 90% of us, 9% of the population of Bangladesh are not having no access to the clean water. About 20 million people in the Bangladesh are contaminated or poisoned with arsenic, and that is a toxic chemical, as you know. And also, as you have seen before from the video clip, Bangladesh has been most affected by the climate change due to the sea level rise. The southern part of the Bangladesh, there was a salt water in their fresh water. So at the end of the monsoon season, almost 6 months, they are suffering from the flood. So most of the territories are submerged. So these regions have the climate change impact and damage as well as the poverty issues. And of course, there are a lot of population in the country. About 140 million population, about 89% of the total population cannot get the clean drinking water. Due to the increase of the sea level rise, there is a region affected by the climate change in northern part and here, and this region, SOL has invested, and in the northern part, our KEPCO invested in. So local partner is also important. We do have a Rodham Foundation, which had activities in conducting the project of the rescue and also humanitarian efforts. So we collaborate with this foundation. So local communities and also entities collaborations are very important, so that they did. And also discovering the companies or the location for the project is important. We do install 10 units once, so they do identify the locations and sites, and also they do consult with or negotiate with the stakeholders, and also they do operate and manage and maintain the facility or installation there. So there are about 15 installations running in there, and additionally, we are constructing 10 additional facilities. And by the end of this year, we're going to have an additional 10 units as well. And depending on the amount of investment, I believe the number of installations will go up. And with this, I hope that we can provide more clean, safe drinking water to the local people. And there are some of the hazard components of groundwater, like coliforms and arsenic that I've mentioned. If you get this water, then when you see the water, then these are really dirt and you cannot drink the water. And every individual who want just today take out water from these water resource, and they travel for about 1.5 hours to get the water from the well. And this is really strenuous work, but they are mostly the women who are doing this job. So we have hired the dedicated personnel for each installation. So even this is a small amount of money, but for them, it was a sort of a job security. So whenever we build or construct a facility, I believe that we can create jobs for them as well. So our headquarters and also branch offices and local personnel are systematically working and cooperating. And additionally, after all, the resources or revenues that we can secure is as follows. As we do supply this water, and as these accumulates, the CER will accumulate as well. When we look at or calculate into the current terms of economy, then it's about the $70,000 has been accumulated as a revenue, and some of them will be paid back to the investors, and some of them will be used for our maintenance operation. There are about 12 countries that our company is working by building, constructions, and operating and maintaining, and we're going to expand this to other countries going forward. Thank you. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
대표님, 제가 네팔에서 보던 물
I have
사업과 관련한
witnessed
그런
many
것들이
water-related
생각이
projects
참
in
많이
Nepal,
나는데요.
and your presentation remind me of the past that I
사업이
engaged
될수
in
있을
that
거라는
water
생각이
project.
듭니다.
I believe
네,
your work
이번
will be
시간에는
meaningful for us
탄자니아와
too.
네팔에서 진행한
And now
태양광
I'd
사업에
like
대해
to introduce you
한국
Mr.
적정
An
기준
Sung-hoon, who
학회장님이시자
has
서울대학교
engaged in the
교수님이신
project in the
안성훈
Tanzania
교수님을
and
모시고자 합니다.
Tanzania,
안 교수님
and
지금
he's also the
온라인으로
professor
접속해
at the
계시는데요.
Seoul National
안녕하세요,
University. He
교수님.
joins us
발표
online.
부탁드립니다.
Professor An, would you please start?
지금 뮤트신가요?
You are on mute. Please unmute yourself first.
네, 이제 들리시죠?
네,
Can you hear me?
들립니다.
Okay.
네, 시작하겠습니다.
Okay,
네,
I'd
저는
like to
서울대학교
begin. Hello
기계과학부
everyone.
교수고요.
I am
이
Professor
현재
An
한국
Sung-hoon
적정
at
기술
Department of
학회
Mechanical
회장을 맡고 있습니다.
Engineering
오늘
of Seoul
말씀드릴
National University,
내용은
double as
적정
President
기술을
of Academic
사용해서
Society for
네팔과
Appropriate
탄자니아의
Technology.
마을에
Today,
어떻게
I'd like to talk
우리를
about
ANS를
how
넣을 수
the
있었나
appropriate
하는
technology
개인적인
enhanced
경험에
resilience in the
대해서
villages in
말씀을
Nepal and
드리도록
Tanzania.
하겠습니다.
I'd like to share my personal experience
네,
in
그래서
Nepal
저희가
and Tanzania.
생각한 여러 가지 방금 전에
There
박순호
are, well, actually, as Mr. Park Suno mentioned that water is really critical to our life. Energy is as well. Vaccination is getting a lot of importance because of COVID-19. And we believe when it comes to the resilience, income is really important. Income is directly related to resilience, and the sense of community is also very critical to resilience.
두 가지 이제 중요한 앞에 말씀드린
There
것
are
중에
two
대표적으로 물과
key
에너지가 있으면 어떤 게
concepts
더
are
중요한가?
water and energy.
이런
What would
질문입니다.
be
물을
more
담당하시는 분은 물이
important?
중요하고
Maybe if
당연히
you are
물이
engaged in
없는
water,
사람은
you believe
근데 이제
water is more
에너지를
important. But if you
중요하다고 생각하는
are working in
그런
the energy,
연구,
then
그런
you can also
사업을
highlight
하시는
enough the
분들은
importance of
에너지가
energy
중요하는데
as
물론 둘
well.
다 중요하죠.
These two
이제 오늘
are
말씀드린 내용
both
중에서는
important. But while
시작이
today's
되면
presentation,
물이 없지만 에너지가 있으면
if
지하수를
we start
펌핑하고
working with
그 물을
energy
가지고
without
농업이나
water,
식수로
then
써서
we can
농업을
pump up the
한다면
underground water,
이런
and then the
소득이
water
창출할 수가
can be
있고
used
소득이
for the
창출되면
drinkable water and the
에너지를 더 모을
irrigation.
수
Then they
있는
can
그런
generate income.
신재생
Then
에너지
we
원을
can
가지고
generate more
사이클을
energies
시작하면
from alternative
물로도 할 수 있고
resources.
에너지로도
Then
할 수 있고
we can
어떤
provide
걸로도
the
할 수
energy
있지만
and
어떤
water
인프라가 중요하다 이런
anytime.
말씀으로
So to achieve
두
this
가지
goal, we have to
중요성에
have
대해서
infrastructure. So I want to
비교를 한번
highlight
해보는
and
생각을
show
했으면
the
좋겠고요.
importance of these two
적정
elements.
기술 appropriate technology는
Then
여러
what is
나라에서 이런
appropriate
말도
technologies?
쓰고 다른 단어들로
There are some other
주로
words
개발도상국에
depending on
필요한
countries,
기술,
but the
왼쪽에
appropriate
필요한
technology
것이
is the development
물을
required in the
이동할 수
developing
있는
countries.
기술,
On the
트레드라고 얘기를
left
할수
side, there is
있겠습니다.
a Q drum. It
그런데
is
저희
helping people to
전 세계
utilize their
인구가
water
지금 70억
resources.
정도 된다고
We
하면
have 7.9 billion
인구가
people
100억까지
living around the
늘어난다고
world.
그래프에
If the
보여지고
temperature
있습니다.
increases
100억까지
10 billion,
늘어났을 때
according to the graph on the bottom, then
인구
most of the
피라미드의
people
가장 밑에 있는
will be
BOP
on the
같은
bottom of the
피라미드에
pyramid of
있는
population.
소득이
And the
낮은
BOP,
지역의 인구가
people in the
대부분일
BOP
것이다라고
will have a
예측을 하고
very
있습니다.
low
그래서 적정
income.
기술이
So
소득이 낮은
appropriate
지역에
technology
그러니까 꼭
is
개도국이
very
아니고
valid and important
어떤
to people and
개발된
region
developed
with a very low
country에서도
income.
교훈에
So even it is not only for
때문에
the developing country, but
기술이
also
중요하게 될
advanced
것이라고
countries,
생각을 하고
because
있고요.
there are
예를
people
들자면
with
왼쪽에
low
보이는데요.
income
저건
as
이제
well.
저희 학교에
And this is
연못이
water,
있어서 연못에
and we
물을
have a pond in my
라이프 스트로우로
school.
한번 먹어본
So
실제로
we drink
마셨던
that
거가
pond
먹어본
water
그리고
through
저희
the life straw.
수업에서 대학원
And the
수업
right
수업에서
side,
나왔는데
we have
뒤쪽
developed a
부분
dental
앞에
drill
보면은
powered by
트램폴린이라는
trampoline.
그
In the back of the
일라스틱한
picture,
놀이
there
기구가
is a
있습니다.
trampoline,
거기서
which is a
친구들이
tool for children
700명
to
있는
make a
학교니까
fun.
계속 뛰어서
And they
놀고
have 700
근데
students,
그게
so the
단순한 놀이
trampoline
기구가 아니고
is just to
그
keep working. But
트램폴린
that is not
밑에
just a
보면은
playground
피스톤하고
for children,
실린더로
but
해서 아이들이
underneath of the
뛰어놀면
trampoline, there is a
공기가
piston
압축되는
and
시설이
cylinder.
있고 아주
When people are
간단한
jumping
피스톤
over it,
실린더에
they
그런
compress the air.
공기를 저장할 수 있는
So they can
탱크에다
save
저장을
the
하고
air in the tank,
그것을 오른쪽에
and
보이는 그
that is
치과의사
sent to
실제로
the tank for the dentists are using when they are treating patients. They do not have electricity, they do not have compressed air, but throughout the trampoline, we are able to to provide compressed air required for the dental treatment. So we started the activities in the appropriate the technology from 2018. I got the tenure at my school, so I have some freedom and sense of job security. So I want to do something special. So we had back then students from Nepal. They are the couple and they are professor in Korea. And back then they were students. And they came up with the idea to provide some help to Nepal. So we tried to initiate, we have some Christian fellowship. Every Wednesday we got together to exchange everything over pizza, and the students and the professors at engineering department, we conclude that we need to provide practical support for Nepal. So we have provided that support to 2016. We decided to have the alternative energies to Nepal to 2016. So these are the wind power and solar power and micro hydro power. In Nepal, almost all areas do not have any power generation. And so we built grid and we built also batteries, and we can establish the LED lighting. In 2012, the LED light is very expensive. So if the power is very expensive, then it is not appropriate technology. But depending how you design the whole system, you can make the solar system for the whole community sustainable or not. But that was a very critical decision when we made back in the 2012. We visited Nantang National Park, which shares territory with China, and there is a pretty long camping site, and it attracts a lot of tourists. It's a very small hotel and accommodation area inside the national park. To go there, you have to walk pretty long distance. During the monsoon season, in particular August, the trail were cut, and the area with the X mark, there was actually one fatality cases who were coming from the USA. So the road is very rough. They have to climb up the mountain to reach this region. So it takes a whole week to go there. So we have to build a solar panel and to go there and to coming back. So it's very challenging. And there are many harmful insects in the summer season. You can find these harmful insects everywhere, and we have a lot of rains, and we have to finish this construction in 2 days. We have to have wirings and all the batteries in that region in 2 days alone. So we have completed the construction 8 p.m. and this is the kitchen of a hotel. Because it is located in the remote area, it's very modest. So they can first generate the electricity, and the electricity goes to the hotel room. And on the morning that we leave, we hand over everything, and we build the community. So we decide the supervisor and also financial the official. We ask them, you have to gather your financial resources to support and maintain this system. So 2 months later, we just go there again to witness how they operate that. As you can see in the screen, they sell electricity at the expensive cost, and they raise their room rate from 300 to 400 as they have electricity, and the ownership goes to all the neighborhoods, and 7 to 8 hotels in the region share the cost, and also share the deposit to the bank to make this project sustainability. In the 2012 and 2013, we visited the southern part of Nepal. The question back then is that the latitude is 27 and the altitude is 10,000 to 1,500. The area is quite big with 12 square kilometers. It's like 3 times bigger than Yeouido, Korea, Seoul. And how much we can make investment to build renewable energy grid and what kind of technology is required. When we ask Korean companies, it may require 30 billion Korean won to build a grid to this neighborhood. But we just have 200 million Korean won only. So
아까 말씀드린 걸 했는데 오늘 이 호스 신형
well, when we are carrying out this project, the Shin Hee-young, the president of Korean Red Cross, was head of the research center. So he gave us some the contribution about 10 million won. And the Korean Ministry of Science and ICT and the National Research Foundation of Korea and ICT have sponsored our project, but the donation was pretty small. So we decide to have small or micro hydropower to generate the power for this region. And it has a benefit because it has it's pretty high and its latitude is 27, but the altitude is not that high given it is Nepal. But the head is pretty high, like 100 meters, then they can generate their power all year round. Batteries doesn't need to be replaced, so it's more sustainable if we go with micro power here. And the turbine is very small, whose diameter is 30 centimeters. Our students design and manufacture them to cut the cost in a big way. So they require water a lot during the month. This is when we visit them. This is winter time. They do not have not much water, and if we just lay it horizontally, then small water tank can collect all the water to send power generation 100 meters away. And the people's neighbors are providing their labor for 3 months for free of charge to build the power generation, so we can save labor cost a lot. So the local people help us deliver the stones and some building, so we can cut the cost from 300 million to 200 million. So the local people have provided the labor for free of charge. So this is the completion of the power generation. On top of that, you can see the tank, that's the reserve. And we have a penstock pipe, which is 100 meters ahead. And we have a 20 kilowatt power plant. And this power plant is still in service. It was completed in 2013. We have built similar power generations in a couple of other villages in Nepal. It is now how it works. And the red is a turbine, the blue is a generator. So the electricity is generated by the power of water. And most of the Southeastern Asia is the relevant the candidate to have this kind of water power generation. So we connect 12 square meters wide grid, and the energy resources is wind power, solar power, and the small hydropower. So 173 households and the police station and schools are using electricity generated in this way. And they have a national grid from the Nepal, but the villagers are still using our electricity because our electricity is cheaper and stable, more stable. And from 2017 up to today, we will work on Tanzania. Tanzania is not Asian country, but the income level is similar to the Nepal. And they are right next to Kilimanjaro, and because they are located around the equator, so their solar energy is abundant, and some of the area are very dry, some others are not. But the challenge is that just like cases in Nepal, we have to collect the fund first to make community-based power plant sustainable way. So when they have some issues, they have to control the electricity. But the thing is that if one villager do not pay electricity bill, then the others do not pay either. So to make that the practices, we have to make a technical approach. So we build a smart meter, and our research team developed it. Smart meter is monitoring how much electricity they consume. And there is a technology named the Avino. It costs $10 around. It's a small computer working as a microcontroller. Actually, it can go to many different applications. You can get Avino everywhere around the world. You even do some coding with Avino. So when we build this system, we make most of the Avino, because the maintenance should be done by the local students. And they do not have electricity sources, so the communication network was not existent there. Then how we can build a smart grid? The Arduino is working as a communications grid, and we build our own the communications grid, and 2G based SMS message was another communication tool to levy people on the utility bill. It's a kind of a prepaid system. They just put their deposit on the system. If they consume their deposit, their electricity supply will automatically cut out. So the last year, because of COVID-19, this electricity helped people make masks to distribute and use. Once you have electricity, you can do many different activities. And now they are using this electricity to pump out underground waters. And some of our students are dispatched there to control that. The last is vaccinations. Even before COVID-19, the vaccinations is really important. Advanced countries are showing 95% or higher vaccinations, but if we achieve 70% of vaccinations, then the child mortality will drop in a big way. So 5 children out of thousands will die early ages, but dozens of children die out of thousands if you go to the low-income countries. Actually, the only death is related to the temperature. And the vaccinations is very sensitive to the storage temperatures. If the room temperature is going 30 to 40 degrees Celsius, then you can't use ice anymore. Because we have renewable energy power generations, we can secure the cold chain for the vaccinations. And there are some refrigerators that is certified by WHO, then they can install the refrigerator to keep the vaccinations cold. And for the remote vehicles, we can have a vaccine carrier based on the motorcycle. So this motorcycle travels remote areas and high hills. We can collect the wasted energy from the automobile and the automobile, and that energy goes to the cooling storages, and that also communicate with the network. The vaccine movement speed and the cooling temperatures will be shared to any other region with a 2G network, and the pictures on the middle shows the actual vaccinations. So today I just share the couple of studies that we have so far, but the key is that electricity energy can be utilized for your living, your chicken farm, or irrigation and drinking water and electricity. And if it goes down, that also will lead to related to the income generation. If income goes up, it is beneficial for the health of neighbors, and students can study at night and they can do some businesses, so they can generate more income, and that help them to generate more energies. Then it also makes a virtuous cycle to increase their income. Then the whole village can develop further. And we have witnessed that is actually happening in Tanzania and Nepal. Last but not least, I'd like to highlight that once we have appropriate technologies, the population on the globe is growing. So we can enjoy many more opportunities, because the key of appropriate technology is affordability. So we can guarantee affordability to some degree with the appropriate technologies, and this will be applied in a sustainable way. So by doing so, we can guarantee and make sure water sources, energy sources, and vaccinations, income, and community. So these 5 key elements will be integrated from the energy-oriented approach. So that's the end. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. So now I'd like to give a big hand to all the speakers.
네, 정말 좋은 발표들 감사드립니다. 그럼 지금부터
Thank you very much for your nice presentations. From now on, we're going to open the floor and also screen for the Q&A. And from Netherlands, Mr. Maarten is waiting, and also from the India, Kohli is also there. So for those who are on site, please come up to the stage, and then we're going to take some questions, and then we're going to address some questions as well. Please come forward. Thank you. And also for those who are online, if you have questions, please use the chat box and leave your questions on the box. Then we're going to address them during the Q&A session. And globally, many audiences are participating in this seminar from Uganda and Turkey. There are audiences online, and they are very much enjoying this session, I think. And without further ado, we're going to pose a question to Mr. Maarten. The COVID-19 pandemic, is it man-made? There are some people who asked whether the COVID-19 is man-made. What's your opinion? Is COVID-19 man-made?
So I'm not a virologist, so I think the jury is out on the precise origins. One of the reasons maybe for asking this question is also whether it is man-made in the sense that climate change has contributed to it. And I think we're very cautious. So I would primarily see the two as two separate threats that are affecting humanity right now. There is some scientific evidence that zoonoses in general, so these diseases that come from animals and then also affect humans, that they are getting worse due to the biodiversity crisis and also maybe aggravated by the climate crisis. But that direct link has not been proven for COVID. What I do think is very important in terms of the man-made nature of the crisis we're currently in, so all the risks people, especially the most vulnerable, are facing right now with the impacts of the pandemic, and at the same time, the impacts of the climate crisis, is the compound nature of many of the impacts. So the one thing I already demonstrated, for instance, during the evacuations in Amphan, it is harder to deal with the disaster when you're also dealing with the pandemic at the same time. But there's an even bigger effect also for the longer term in terms of people's livelihoods when they get hit by a disaster and need to recover from it. while at the same time the economy is suppressed and opportunities for livelihoods are more limited due to the pandemic, that is even harder. And we know, for instance, I mentioned already that 100 million people, in addition to where we were before, have been thrown into extreme poverty, according to the World Bank. So those 100 million people are now also much more exposed to the same extreme weather events that mean that those disasters will have a harder impact. So in that sense, I would say the impact of the pandemic is aggravated also by human activity and by climate change. The good news, in a way, is that building resilience allows us to deal with multiple shocks at once. So let's take this on the positive side and say that ways to deal with extreme poverty, ways to increase disaster resilience, also allow us to deal with many of these aspects at once. And more resilient communities will be able to withstand not just the current shocks of the pandemic, but also what's coming to us in the climate crisis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. 다음 퀘스천은요.
And next
제가 그대로
question,
영어로 읽을게요. Some of the
I will
climate change
just
projects are
read out in
long-term and need sustainability. How do you integrate with government sector office to ensure sustainability? 이 부분은 누가 대답을 해주셔야 될지 우선 제가 로히니한테 한번 묻고 싶고요.
I'd like to ask this question to Ms.
Did you
Rohini.
hear what the question? Rohini, did you hear what I said? 네, 소리가 안 들리는 걸까요?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I think we lost the participant for a second.
Okay. So some of the climate change projects are long-term and need sustainability. How do you integrate it with a government sector office to ensure sustainability? You cannot hear me, right?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I got the last part of your question, government sector and sustainability, but I didn't get the first part. Could you repeat that?
I mean, I just sent you through the chat box, so can you check?
Yes. Some of our long-term and need sustainability. Look, this is, I mean, this is kind of a very important question, and I think some, strategies have been found, but they're not perfect. I mean, with some of the new generation programs, which are funded, for example, by international climate funds, like the GCF, for example, and also other funds like the, funds, with say EKI, government of Germany. Now for GCF, there is a requirement for co-financing of the projects, and it's like not a nominal thing. It's actually, it's actually that there's funding allocated, like real cash that is allocated with the, so the co-financing is actually, real cash which is allocated, which means the project is not just donor funded. I mean, it is a kind of a strong co-financing. Now, the issue about sustainability after the project ends, I think that there are now practices where there is, letters for operational maintenance and things like that are provided at the start of the design of the program, and they don't get approved unless this is the case. But this is not across all the programs, but this is something that is happening in several projects, particularly funded by the Green Climate Fund. So that's one way of ensuring sustainability. But at a higher level, most of the, I think, applications for international funds, they require a letter from, from the government or from NDAs of the GCF in that country, which, which show that there's a lot of ownership from the government. And it's not just a letter, it's the content of the letter which is important. How does it connect with the national plan of the country? How does it connect with the, climate plan of the country? All this has to be specified. And so that also increases the likelihood that there is more chance of sustainability. But I'm sure that this can be improved. These are just some practices which are taking place. It's not, I don't think it's a perfect situation, but I think having that co-financing, having that, making sure that there is, maintenance operations after the program is ended, documented, these kinds of things will ensure some sustainability. But these are only for internationally funded programs. I think internally, there's a huge expenditure on adaptation by governments. And a lot of these UNDP, CPIRs, Climate Public Expenditure Review, we have taken snapshots of how much countries are already spending on climate change. And it's all domestic. It is a huge amount of domestic funds which are being spent on climate change already. They're not being tracked enough. So I don't know if that's an indicator of sustainability or not, but it's a clear indicator that climate impacts, the response to climate impacts is being, that the biggest financial burden of this is being borne by the countries themselves. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rohini, for your reply. 감사합니다. 그러면 바로 이어서 또
Now,
진행을
continuing
해볼게요.
on, I'd like to ask another
저희
question.
박순호 대표님하고
We have
안성훈
Mr. Park
교수님한테
Sun-ho and
저희
Professor
적십자
An
직원들,
Sunghoon and the
전 세계
staff of
있는 직원들
Korean
제일
Red
궁금한
Cross
것이
have a lot of
과연,
questions.
그
And the big
방글라데시를
question is that,
제외한 그런
except
곳에서도
Bangladesh
오리엔텍에서 아까
and many
말씀하셨던
other
그
areas in the
CBM이라는 그
Asia and
기술이
Africa,
적용이 될 수
CBM
있는지
technology can be
그럴 의향이
applicable
있으신지
in many
답변해
other
주실 것
areas.
같고요.
And are you
또
willing
안성훈
to
교수님
work with
말씀하신
us to
것처럼
apply the
그
technologies?
적정
And
기술이
Professor An, you talked about appropriate technologies. And are you willing to work with NGOs and the Red Cross and Red Crescent in developing countries? How we can build cooperations? Many are asking these questions to me. So can you give us the answer?
교수님 먼저
Professor An, would you
답변해 주시겠습니까?
please start?
교수님,
Are you still with us, Professor An?
네.
Yes,
마이크가
yes.
꺼져 있었어요.
네.
The mic was on,
네.
off.
네, 뭐 저희가 이런 걸
Well,
약 한 10년 정도
we have been
하다가
in this
보니까
work
이제
for
여러
10 years, so we have
기관들한테
worked with many
합류를
different
할수 있냐,
organizations so
그런
far. Actually,
실제로는
many are
거의
asking us to
전체적인
cooperation,
학교의
but
학생들이
actually,
뭐 연구실에 있는
we have
학생들이 이걸
in-house
커버하기는
project.
너무
It has been covered by the
요청하시는
students,
지역들이
but the
많죠.
region
그러니까
that many others are
이
asking us
아시아뿐
are
아니라
very
아프리카뿐
wide.
아니라 남미,
They are not only
뭐
talk
여러
about
지역에서
Asia, but also Latin
이런,
America. They want to apply our technologies to many different areas of world, whether any area that requires energy, depending on their income level. And if you go to the remote area, less than 10% of people is having electricity, which is similar to the general areas of North Korea. And even though they have electricity, it's not working 24/7, but they just have electricity for 10 hours a day. And if you go to the local area of the country, their electricity will be provided a shorter period of time. So demands are high, but we cannot go there with you all the time. So we are kind of open source research center. So we are providing very simple technologies, and we can teach you how to utilize the Arduino or some other simple technologies. So we are having education project as well. And the students in Tanzania can learn how to use Arduino. So it's very simple and easy to follow. So I can say that we are providing the smart technologies for monitoring, and other technologies are known to everyone. And so it's more like who is really acting out with the simple technologies. So the many organizations who are acting out actually can have an approach to these technologies, and it's only about whether you're gonna have it at the small scale or large scale. You know, if you go to the very small scale project, then the funding agency will not be interested in. Our approach is bottom up, so we are kind of encouraging local people to take part in. So it takes a pretty long time to motivate every stakeholders. But you know, we are able to provide the solution, so you can use it. But,
$1,000,000 쏟아보면 된다 이런 게 아니고
we are not simply saying that if you are having $1,000,000, you can achieve it. But it's more like you have to have some dedicated person who go there in the remote area to encourage local people to act out their plan and project. So it requires only small amount of money, but you have a lot of some wheels. So the NGO, schools, government agency, or humanitarian organizations can set out some plan. The governments can have a big scale project. That's my answer to your question. Thank you.
네, 저도 이런 질문을 굉장히 많이 받습니다.
Well, I oftentimes receive a lot of this kind of a question. The issue of the drinking water is essential for the development project, and this is really difficult to secure financing this project. So linking with the CDM, I believe that this will be a very good project. While I was implementing this project, there are two challenges that I oftentimes encounter. First, connecting with this carbon credit project, it requires a lot of time and resources, financial resources. The project in Bangladesh, for example, to be registered as a CDM project, it took about 2 years. During this course, we have to get approval from the Bangladesh government, and to register at UNFCCC, we need to have the documentation and also the approval process, which are very complicated. So we needed additional 2 years. So during the registration process, the human resources as well as financial resources are needed. The other challenge that I want to say is that the demand of the drink water, of course, that is directly linked with the amount of the CER. So the needs of the drinking water requires to be many, and also installing the system, and also the human resources who are running and operating and installing the facility is needed, and also we need to have a reliable partner at the place. So we need to have our human resources and the stable partners and financial resources. Thank you.
And last question goes to Ms. Lee Jisun, Save the Children Korea.
여쭙고 싶은 것은 GCF 인증을 받은
So you are the first NGO to get the GCF certificate, and you are the first NGO to get that certificate. Can you share the know-how with us to get the certificate from the GCF? So Save Children International received the certificate of GCF. So Save Children Australia was the leader, and 6 nations included in that international are carrying out 13 different international projects. It took a pretty long time for Save the Children Australia to get the GCF certificate, so it may require another the long time to learn how to get the GCF certificate. So after that, we may find some other opportunity to share our experience, and we plan to set out some project in Indonesia. We are now at the concept note development stage. After that, we may be able to share that experience with you. Thank you. It has been quite a long time to have this seminar. So if there is no more question, please give me a time to check the questions. So actually, we do not have more questions yet. Another question goes to Professor An. How we can get to learn about Arduino? Can you give us some guide to learn about Arduino?
교수님 또 뮤트세요.
Please unmute.
안 들립니다.
네, 이게 좀 컨트롤이 되고 있어서 제가 좀
So I do not have the control of the speaker.
챗박스에
Anyhow, I will left the web address of appropriate technology research
다시
center.
뮤트 되셨거든요.
You are on mute again, Professor An.
네.
이제
Yes.
됐죠. 네, 그래서 방금
I just
챗박스로
leave a memo on the chat box. These are the papers released by our research center. It describes about some alternative energies, and it covers not only the power but also the water. Arduino itself can be very easy to learn. You can find some online lectures everywhere. Once you have internet access, you can find many different sources to learn about Arduino. The system that we are building with Arduino is specified and specialized. So if you specifically want to learn about our system, then you have to have source that we developed. We can open the access to a certain degree, and you can practice it and exercise it and develop some smart pattern by yourself. Then you can build some Arduino that is able to have communications. The reason why we are using the Arduino is that it's a commercial smart metro, but they do not open their database. So to make most of the database, we develop these technologies. But the technological wise, it's very simple. Arduino itself is cheap and accessible, so it's very easy to learn.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very
그러면
much.
더 이상 질문이
Since we
없으시면
do not have
Q&A 세션을
additional questions, I'd
마치도록
like to wrap
하겠습니다.
up the Q&A session
참가해주신
here.
모든 발표자
Once
여러분께
again, thank you
감사드립니다.
everyone,
감사합니다.
discussant and the participants. Thank you.
네, 오랜 시간 기다리셨습니다. 오늘
You have waited for so long.
네, 오늘 제3회 국제 재난보건
Okay,
세미나
so we have finally
유익한 논의와
concluded the seminar, and also I'd like to thank you all for the good comments and speeches, and also the good listening as well. Going forward, our APDRC related to the DRR discussions and climate discussions, we are going to make best efforts. And with that, we're going to end the seminar.
감사합니다.
Thank you all.
감사합니다.